recording. Perfect. Thanks so much. So welcome everyone and happy Affordable Housing Week. Thank you for joining us today on our coffee chat with an affordable housing developer. We have Zac Baker from Southport Financial Services. I'm Amanda DeShazo. I'm the Executive Director for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium. We are a membership-based nonprofit of more than 60 members. We advocate and educate to promote the development and preservation of affordable housing across Pierce County. And we're also happy to host Pierce County Affordable Housing Week. This is the second time we've done this. And we welcome you to join our other events throughout the rest of the week, today and Friday, by visiting our website, which maybe Casey, you can put it in the chat for us. We still have a variety of events going on, including more virtual panels. Tonight we have a networking reception, which Mark will probably tell you about a little bit later. And then tomorrow we have a conversation about community land trusts, and that will be followed by a legislative forum on Friday. And then we added another virtual, it's like a webinar, sorry, with Corporation for Supportive Housing, which a lot of folks who are on this call might be really interested in. So Corporation for Supportive Housing is going to be putting together a capacity building fund for BIPOC developers. And they are going to be going over what that looks like tomorrow at that webinar. And you can find more information on our website to register for that. But they've got training that they're providing, and then they have millions of dollars that they're going to be also combining with that capacity building. So and that's here in Washington too. So please join that if you're interested in development, maybe getting some training and becoming a developer. And so before we get started, I wanted to make sure that I say thank you to our title sponsor, US Bank, for making Affordable Housing Week possible. Couldn't do it without their support. And then I'll briefly go over the layout of our discussion. It's pretty straightforward. I have some questions for Zac about his work in development. And then we'll leave about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A from the audience. And you can raise your hand or post questions in the chat as they come up. Really, this is like an informal conversation. So yeah, please just raise your hand or pop your question in the chat and we will make sure we get to that. And so today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Zac Baker to share insights in developing affordable housing in Pierce County. So Zac works for Southport Financial Services, which is a for-profit developer that has deals across the nation. Currently, Southport is working on a few projects in Pierce County. One you might have seen near Fircrest, which is titled The Lookout, and another it's Spanaway, right? Spanaway Viridian. Where is the Viridian Grove?
Viridian Grove's in the city of Tacoma, and then we have Cedar Flats that's out in Frederickson.
Thank you so much for correcting me. And so I'll let Zac talk more about that as we get into our conversation. But please join me in welcoming Zac Baker. Hi, Zac.
Hey, Amanda.
And then I forgot to mention also too that Zac is a board member of ours, and he's been just fantastic. So thank you so much for joining us today, Zac. I sent you some questions to get us started, and we might end up improving a little bit too, because I had some things that I was thinking through that might be important for folks to know in the conversation as we continue talking. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to send you a question. I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't put on the list of questions, but super softball question, because I think it's important to distinct the difference between a for-profit housing developer and a nonprofit housing developer. Can you just touch on what that means and how that might just be a little bit different when you are putting together an affordable housing deal?
Sure. Obviously, my experience or knowledge base on the nonprofit side is limited. That's not my focus, but I think primarily the difference is just that we are a profit-motivated company that is also mission-oriented, and I think primarily on the nonprofit side, I mean, you have folks that the mission is their primary goal, regardless of whether or not the project will make money. So we're looking at it as a mission-driven business. And I think a nonprofit developer is looking at it primarily from the mission-based side, not necessarily looking at 15 years from now, kind of the intrinsic real estate value. So I think one of the reasons that we chose to be a for-profit and continue to do that is that we have limited resources. The state, the country has limited resources for affordable housing production. And I think when we look at our business model and there's a reason to be efficient, it drives certain decisions and helps utilize the resources, leverage the resources, and kind of stretch the buck to make the limited resources go as far as possible. That said, we do partner almost all of the time with a nonprofit. That's to help kind of further the mission behind what we're doing, and also to make sure that we have the nonprofit lens to look through when we're kind of designing a project or going through pre-development. So I think there are differences, but I don't think that the process we follow is incredibly far from the process that nonprofits follow.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Great answer. So let's get into the questions that I actually sent you. One of the ones that's probably on most people's minds. What are some of the most significant challenges you face when developing affordable housing?
Honestly, I think there's kind of three main things, and we talk about them a lot, but land availability, particularly in places like Tacoma that are, built out, costs, and then just the time associated with doing these projects. So, we touched on it a minute ago, but resources are limited across the board. Things aren't getting cheaper. And so trying to figure out, how you're going to fund these things, how you're going to finance them, and not just the capital side, but, if we're talking about 40, 50 years of rent restriction, how do you project out 10, 15, 20 years down the road when the roofs need to be replaced or the windows are failing or the siding's failing? We try to look at how to capitalize these things in a way that they're, functional and, quality on day one, and they're functional and quality on year 15 to year 20. So I think the challenge we face is just primarily a resource problem, whether that's availability of land, availability of capital, or availability of time. Somebody's got to be there monitoring these things in all phases of pre-development, development, construction.
Yeah, that's really helpful too. And I'm gonna also interject a little bit with like the nonprofit side too, because I was hoping to have both a nonprofit and for-profit, and it just didn't work out. But to provide folks with some insight as well. So when a nonprofit has issues that arise, with the windows or the roof or what have you, and we need repairs, most of the time there's very limited operating and maintenance funds, and a lot of the time they have to go to the state and request financing in order to upkeep those units. And so just one of those differences between for-profit and nonprofit, the operating and maintenance for nonprofits is just very slim. And that's one of the major issues we find in Pierce County, because we are very under-resourced for that. And so, when the capital dollars come out from the state, because we don't even have resources at the local level really to offer for maintenance and operation. It really comes from the state, and it's a competitive pool where folks have to apply and hope that they're able to get the funding, and it takes a very long time. So if you're looking at, failure in the structure somehow, it's really hard to fix that within, a really quick time frame. So just things to keep in mind between the different models and what Zach's able to do to support his structures and the tenants inside them versus nonprofits. And so, yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
one thing on that, I think, one of the ways that we've tried to change the program, I think over time, is that, and I guess I'm referring to the tax credit program, but things like income averaging or kind of looking at different AMI levels in a project, I think help, because if you're deeply subsidizing rents at like a 30% AMI level, there's there's just not enough, like you mentioned, there's just not enough rental income generated to cover capital costs of operating and maintenance, down the road. So I think looking at, kind of making AMI targeting broad in a project and trying to serve 30% households, but also going up to 50 and 60% households helps the project be successful down the road without having to come back to the state or the local jurisdiction for additional funding.
Yeah, thank you for that. Helpful context. And so this kind of plays on that, and maybe you've already answered this, but is there any like specific obstacles unique to Pierce County compared to other regions that you find in developing? Because I know you guys develop all over.
Yeah, honestly, Pierce County is pretty good for the most part. There's a lot of support, especially local government, city council, county council. I think there's a lot of people pushing for affordable housing. One of the challenges we face are permitting timelines and just kind of the availability of land that's unencumbered by wetlands or biodiversity areas or steep slopes. There's just not a lot of places left to develop. So I think as far as Pierce County government's concerned, we're probably pretty good. I think Pierce County land availability and kind of site conditions, that's a different story. I think that's probably the biggest challenge, honestly. I mean, we have a 27-acre site right now that 13 acres will be buildable. So I mean, it's kind of wild when you look at that, and what could be a 500 unit site is a 250 unit site.
Yeah, which is so crazy, but got to protect the environment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So kind of getting back to what you had just mentioned, affordable housing development is often perceived as a really lengthy process. Could you explain why these projects typically take such a long time to develop, I guess, in general, the process, and then from construction on?
Yeah. In our experience, it's the alignment of all of the pieces. So, we work with the tax credit program almost exclusively, and that's one funding round a year. Well, historically it's been different, but the last 5 years or so, it's been one funding round a year. And so it's not generally going to line up with your timelines for permitting or finding a site. Something comes on the market, you're running land feasibility, you have these kind of 6 or 8 month timelines, and none of them line up perfectly. The dominoes don't fall exactly in a row, and that gets more complicated, I think, especially in kind of the nonprofit development role, because they're not just going to the tax credit program, they're also going to Department of Commerce, the Housing Trust Fund, the city, the county, other places that probably have an annual funding round. And if that annual funding round isn't aligned or doesn't fit into the land feasibility timeline or the tax credit timeline, then I mean, you could be waiting 8 or 10 months basically just for your next set of funding. So I think, again, Pierce County is probably a place that's done an above average job of trying to align those resources and trying to put the funding rounds in order. But that, nobody can control when a site comes online or how long it takes to get your building permits. So yeah, I think there's just a lot of pieces and they all take a lot of time, and they're very rarely lined up back to back in kind of a critical path order.
So that's fantastic. That's definitely the experience. I'll speak to the nonprofit side. Yeah, like Zac has said, the alignment of the resources has been in the works, I mean, forever, but since I've come on in 2018, we have done a really great job working with our local funders, government funders, and then the state and the tax credit folks. So for folks who are interested in doing nonprofit development, we have worked it out so you can apply for the local funds, and Pierce County and Tacoma have pretty much aligned their timeline. So you can apply for both of those. They use a similar application. It's called the Combined Funders application. You can submit that. They release when they've selected who's going to get funded at about the same time. I will say Pierce County is going to take a little bit longer now. They just recently adopted a sales tax to support affordable housing development. And with that came some more structure around the decisions about who's going to, have access to that money. So we're gonna figure out that process because this is the first year that we'll have access to those dollars. So that may push it out a little bit. So, but then in terms of leveraging the dollars, so say you get funding from the local resources, you can then go to the state and say, we got money from our local funders for this project. They're committed to this project. And that will help boost your score. The state always talks to local funders about if they support the project. If you don't have local funds in your project, you're not likely to get state dollars, just flat out. It's a priority for them. They want to see that you have commitment from the local. And then from there, they'll apply for the state funds and then talk about tax credits. That's a little bit tricky for folks who are interested in the tax credit projects in Pierce County. We made kind of an agreement. We have what is called the Metro Pool, and there's 5 counties in the Metro Pool. So for tax credits, it's kind of like the state is divided up into 3 groups. So King County gets an allocation of tax credits. They're on their own. We have the Metro Pool, which is the 5 major counties underneath King County. And then you have the balance of state. They're the non-metro pool, I guess is what they call them. And that's like all of the other small jurisdictions. So in the metro pool, the 5 counties have come together on an agreement to say, Pierce County and Snohomish County have said we are willing to give up some of our tax credits to the smaller jurisdictions in that pool so that we can guarantee we get a one funded project through tax credits every year. Because how it was before is everybody was just throwing in their applications and Pierce County was really losing out. Like there were years where we didn't get any tax credits for a very long time. And so this has really set up our pipeline to get projects online, and tax credits, they're very helpful, especially for reaching those really low income rents. And so they're just so important to projects and helping them make them pencil. So yeah, that's kind of how that works with tax credits in Pierce County. And the prioritization for that too is a little weird. So there's a local group, and I'm one of them, and then the other folks are the local funders. So Lakewood, Pierce County, and Tacoma. You would submit like a pre-application for your LIHTC to us, and based on scoring, we determine who goes to the top, and then we send that project to the Washington State Housing Finance Commission and say, this is our prioritized project for this year. And so long as they meet the criteria, that they're good to go. And so this has been going on. I think this is probably the 3rd year. Is it the 2nd or 3rd year? I can't remember. But as we see the dollars grow in Pierce County, we see the tax credit applications. Like we're going to have, I think, 5 this year, which is huge for us. So we'll see how that goes, but for anybody that's interested in the process, that's really the breakdown of what that looks like. Okay, so on to the next question.
Well, real quick, just while
yeah.
you're on the kind of metro allocation or the metro tax credit pool, I think one of the other things that kind of giving the tax credit allocation decision to the counties did, which I was a huge supporter of, is allowing counties to kind of make a more accurate decision of what the county's needs were. Before it was one funding round at the state level, and so the state was doing their best to prioritize what they felt they were hearing from all of the local jurisdictions. And when they kind of gave some of the decision-making power to Pierce County and Clark County and the other metro pools, I think it allowed us to more accurately or precisely tool what we were doing in Pierce County, because we might have different needs than Clark County or than Spokane or whoever. So I think there were a couple good things that came out of that.
Yeah, and Zach was very instrumental in helping to make that happen, which is fantastic. And I will say for folks that are interested in that, the nonprofit side, because I know in the nonprofit side, I will say the only rub that has been coming up for us with this entire process is the projects, so the funding and the tax credit, so the state funding and the tax credit projects, like those, it's like, it's a really quick turnaround. And I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Zach, I don't know if you know this or not, but the state funding announcements come out around the same time as the tax credit funding announcements. So you're kind of applying for state and then applying for tax credits at the same time. And the only rub we've had around that is that it's not always guaranteed that our tax credit projects that the county selects is in alignment with the state and their projects, because the state really prioritizes like homeless housing and the lowest of the low income. And that's been a challenge for us because, like I said, in Pierce County, we just don't have operating dollars to support those projects. And the subsidy there isn't really, allowing us to build a lot of those permanent supportive housing projects. And so we're kind of trying to figure out, if there's a project that has tax credit allocations, like I 100% believe that it should have state dollars, like no question asked, because those tax credits are so hard to get and they really make a project, they make or break a project. And so that state funding is so necessary. So we're doing a lot of advocacy around that to try to get some alignment, but I would say that's like the only rub in this whole process. And we are trying to figure it out, and Department of Commerce has heard us. And I think they're trying to work out what that looks like also with the State Housing Finance Commission. Anything to add on that, Zach?
No, I think that's a really good point. I think it just goes back to, availability of financial resources, but also it goes back to the timeline on these things, because like you said, if you have an allocation of tax credits, but your project's dependent on state funding and you miss the only funding round in a given year, now you're 12 months behind.
Yep.
So I think that's one of the reasons that Pierce County and the city of Tacoma have been supportive and have pushed for, generating some of those sales tax dollars and trying to create local funding so that we can better align projects even without help from the state. But we have limited resources, so I don't know that it gets all the projects all the way home. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to ask you about this one, which I don't know how well you can speak to it, but it's about the use of tax dollars. And this was kind of, we always hear that, why is there so much funding going into affordable housing, but like not enough being built?
Mm-hmm.
And then why does the process take so long? Like these are always the questions that I get, and we've touched on the process. But can you speak to anything about, how funds are allocated for affordable housing? Well, I guess we already talked about that, but where are the tax dollars going in these projects?
Yeah. Honestly, I think this is kind of it's a tricky one, because we have high standards, higher than your normal market rate developer for the housing we're producing. So whether it's an energy efficiency metric or sustainability metric, we are outperforming, delivering a product that's better than most of the market rate housing providers from an energy efficiency and sustainability standpoint. And that costs money. There's a reason the market rate folks aren't doing it. Nobody's requiring them to, and there's no mission there. There's just a business there. So I think we obviously want to be producing quality housing. We want to be conscious about the environment and sustainability, and that's important, and that comes at a cost. And unfortunately, those standards take the available funding, whatever you're using, tax credits or local funds, state funds, and kind of dilutes the potential, because every unit we're putting in service costs more than a comparable market unit. So that's part of it. I think the other thing you're seeing is, what we've talked about from a timeline perspective. We can't just go out there and get something permitted and close and start construction and kind of set out our timeline, because in a lot of cases, we're dependent on multiple funding rounds, or we're dependent on, some other timeline for an affordable housing component that we're not necessarily in control of. And so I think, time can also cost a lot of money, especially when we're going through things like COVID and costs went up astronomically. I think even recently, I mean, just with inflation, nearing double digits and stuff, we saw not just capital costs, but operating costs go up. And so that's put a burden on the already constrained financial resources that are out there for affordable housing. I don't think it's like disappearing into the ether. I think people argue, that these projects cost a lot of money because nobody's paying attention and money's being wasted. And I don't think that's the case. I think these things take longer than everybody realizes. And I think we're building them to a higher efficiency and sustainability standard than people realize. And I think in some cases we're intentionally not overbuilding, but we're building these units in a way that we know 15 years from now or 20 years from now, the capital resources won't be there. The operating and maintenance piece that we've talked about won't be there because the rents are so heavily restricted that we might go in there and have welded seam flooring in the bathrooms where, a vinyl plank product is probably what's being used in the rest of the market. But we're doing that because we know that 20 years from now, we're not going to have the, $3,000 rents to cover the replacement cost of that flooring. We're going to have $1,200 rents. And so we need to build something now that's going to outlast what the rest of the market's using.
Yeah, and Zach, can you talk about what AMIs you serve? And again, for folks on the call, AMI is the area median income. And so, yeah, if you can touch on that. I don't think we touched on that versus like nonprofits too, because I think that that's part of the conversation here when you're talking about for-profit developers and how you guys make your projects pencil, because you don't require as much subsidy versus a nonprofit who does.
Yeah, we try to serve all income levels from 30 to 60% AMI. Generally, the larger projects, like the Lookout that you referenced, Viridian Grove, the Cedar project, those are going to be 50 and 60% AMI levels. And those are all 100 plus units. The reason that we're doing that is really, well, twofold. One, operational efficiency. Having staff dedicated to a project is hard when that project's only 25 or 30 units. And then the other piece, and maybe even the bigger piece, is the funding types available. So there's the 9% tax credit program, and there's the 4% tax credit program. And the 4% tax credit program has a dependency on tax exempt bonds. And without putting everybody on a call to sleep, basically you have to receive an award of tax exempt bonds in order to qualify for the 4% tax credit. But once you qualify with over 50% of your costs in tax exempt bonds, then there's essentially an unlimited number of 4% tax credits, assuming you qualify for them. The 9% program is a lot more constrained than that. There's a finite number of 9% tax credits, and once they're gone, they're gone. And so that limits project size and also kind of drives some of the AMI targeting conversation, because a 9% tax credit, as you might expect, has a little over twice as much impact as a 4% tax credit from kind of a tax credit investor equity delivery standpoint. And so getting the additional equity in a 9% deal means that you don't need as much debt basically to cover the cost of construction. So the 9% program has a very finite number of tax credits. It also comes with a lot more equity. And so you size a project to the maximum, 9% allocation, and that's it. And that might be 50 units, that might be 70 units, but it's not going to be 200 units. Whereas a 4% project, if you can qualify for the tax exempt bonds, or if you can get allocated tax exempt bonds, the 200 unit project can qualify for as many 4% tax credits as it takes. And that's great, but they don't cover as much of the cost. And so those larger 4% deals are more debt dependent. And in order to drive NOI and drive debt, you need the higher rents. So traditionally, you'll see that 9% programs are tooled to serve 30, 40, maybe 50% AMIs. And the 4% program is tooled to serve 60% AMIs and maybe 50% AMIs in counties where incomes are high. So I'm not sure if all of that's tracking, but does that kind of make sense? That's why you'll see a lot of our bigger projects be tooled to serve higher AMIs, and some of our smaller projects will be tooled with 9% tax credits and geared for 30 to 40% AMI levels.
Deeper affordability, yeah. And I'm going to be completely honest, like, it took me a long time to figure out the 9% tax credit program and like be a solid advocate for that. And when it comes to the 4% stuff, like that stuff is just so over my head. It's going to take me another year to figure out the 4%, but that also needs some work and pipelining. And so it's very important. I know a lot of our developers, for-profit and nonprofit, use 4%, but I'm just like, oh, that's a whole nother beast that I don't know how to wrap my mind around quite yet. But I'm glad that you have a wealth of knowledge around that. So anybody on the call who has questions about that, just reach out to Zac. I'll be listening alongside you. Okay, so I think I want to do just like one more question, and then we can open it up to folks who are on the call. And I'm like, what question should we ask? I think this is a big one. I want to ask you about the misconceptions that people commonly have about affordable housing. And as a for-profit affordable housing provider, how are you guys combating that? And do you see that as much? I know the nonprofits battle with this all the time. And it's always, oh, they're providing homeless housing for people that don't even want housing, But what's that like for you guys as for-profit developers, and how do you handle that?
Yeah, real quick, I just want to hit, I think Jim commented private activity bonds are not unlimited. That is true. Tax exempt bonds, private activity bonds, not unlimited. There are more of them than 9% tax credits. And
that's the 4%, right?
That's the 4%, right? Okay. And once you receive, as long as 50% of your project costs are financed with the tax exempt bonds, then you qualify for as many 4% tax credits as you have costs to support. So I think that's the difference, is that at 9%, you're just out. There's no more, what your allocation is your allocation. Whereas the 4% tax credits, there's no cap on the tax credit. There's a cap on the tax exempt bond that drives the eligibility for the 4% credit. So it's kind of funky math, but anyway, going back to, I think, what you were asking, I mean, how do we deal with, I guess you mean kind of coming into a market, proposing a project, getting local support, stuff like that? I mean, is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah, I mean, I guess about who you serve,
Okay.
When people tell you you're an affordable housing developer,
Yeah.
Who do they assume you're serving, and how do you address that? What do you tell them?
Honestly, I mean, it depends on the project. Your 60% AMI kind of workforce housing units serve a different population than your 30% potentially homeless at entry units. And so I think being transparent and kind of making it personal and making it real to people is what we found to be the most helpful. We try to put income across the spectrum into reality, and we try to associate jobs, or we try to associate people with who's going to live there. I mean, everybody wants to know who their neighbor is. And um, I think we've tried to connect AMI levels to folks that are just like us, to friends and family members, um, to kind of personalize these projects and let people, see who's going to be there and understand who their neighbors are. And generally, we don't have a ton of pushback. I think a lot of people are anti-development in general, and I think a lot of people are confused about the kind of black box of affordable housing. What is it? What's it mean? Who's going to live there? And so I think trying to just be transparent, personalize it, is what we do, and it seems like it's worked okay.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I think it's really important. And Zach, do you guys serve mostly families? I can't remember. Who do you serve? Like, what does that demographic look like?
Yeah. Again, it's kind of project dependent.
Right.
We do a little bit of everything. So the Lookouts, a senior project that's 55 plus. Those are all 1 and 2 bedroom units, and we did that because the site was really constrained and there wasn't a bunch of room to put 3 and 4 bedroom units there. But Viridian Grove, the other City of Tacoma project, is 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units. That's going to serve families and people with disabilities. And then, if you look at maybe a 9% project, we're gonna serve 30% AMIs, 40% AMIs, potentially some homeless at entry, something like that. So again, it kind of goes back to what kind of site you're dealing with, what kind of resources you have, and kind of what best fits, each scenario. Every project's a little different.
Yeah, thank you. It's really important to note. Okay, so we've got some time to ask Zach some questions. If you want to raise your hand, I can call on you and you can come off mute and ask your question, or you can put a question in the chat. It looks like we have one from Mr. Michael Mira. I'm going to go ahead and read it out. Thank you, Zach. Has the recent new Tacoma Renter Protection Ordinance, which prohibits evictions for non-payment of rent for much of the year, affected the interest of developers to do work in Tacoma and the availability or price of housing financing for Tacoma projects?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. But the honest answer is it's impacted our interest in doing business in the city of Tacoma. Primarily because we use the 4% program, which is a debt-based program frequently. That's what both of the projects in Tacoma are using. And there's a big risk associated with putting $20 million in private debt into a project and then not being confident in your ability to service that debt down the road. So we have about 600 units in the city of Tacoma, and we're struggling right now with some of the impacts of the recent tenant protection regulations. I mean, we're unfortunately seeing higher delinquency. We're seeing kind of the ripple effects, and yeah, it's not something I like talking about. I mean, it's a disappointing thing. I mean, I'm sitting in the city of Tacoma right now, and it's a bummer because I think it is driving other people away. I can't speak for them, but it's making us look outside of city limits for sure.
And I'll just add to that too, with the passage of the Maureen Howard Affordable Housing Act in Pierce County, a lot of those dollars are going to be prioritized outside of the city of Tacoma, just because most of the affordable housing development that's being done is in the city of Tacoma, and the city of Tacoma has a lot of subsidy to provide to that. But in order to break up that, high concentration of affordable housing in one city, they want to prioritize their dollars outside of it. And so I think that might just be a little bit more incentive for folks to start looking outside of the city. Okay, so Ryan, you have a question. Go for it.
Yeah, Zach, do you have a series of actions or boxes to check when you go through qualifying projects?
Yeah, we do. We kind of go through a number of rounds. I mean, we kind of go through phases of, you know, when a site, you know, comes up for sale or something, or we hear about land availability, we kind of look at the size of the site, the location, the access to transit, or, you know, kind of whatever amenities and services. And we take those and look through a 9% tax credit lens, and we look through a 4% tax credit lens, and then we look through Pierce County funding lens and City of Tacoma funding lens, or wherever, because we're trying to make sure that all of these different check boxes are hit. Basically, I mean, there's so many different priorities and so many people looking for different things that we want to make sure we're serving the people that are going to live there well, and that we're also, you know, kind of hitting the priorities that we're hearing from local jurisdictions or at the state level or whatever it is. We actually have a site that is in Yakima, and it's just over a quarter of a mile. It's like 0.3 miles from a grocery store, and so it doesn't qualify under the 9% program. It doesn't get those points for local resources, and it's just one of those things that is a bummer, because it's, you know, here it is, perfectly zoned, flat, utilities ready to go, but, you know, we have no interest in the site because it's never going to be competitive for tax credits. So there are a bunch of different phases that we kind of go through, and different tests that we run, I guess, on a project's kind of feasibility or eligibility.
Are you able to share those boxes or actions of, you know, do you have a list that you could share with the group so we can kind of see what that looks like as far as actions go?
Yeah, we don't have a list, like an internal sheet or anything. Honestly, it changes well, not quite every year, but it changes frequently. I would just encourage you to kind of look at the WishFIC website. I would go to the 4% tax credit policy manual, the 9% tax credit policy manual, Pierce County funding NOFA, City of Tacoma funding NOFA, things like that. That's really our list, and we don't keep a comprehensive list of that in-house, because it can change. And like that Yakima site, if it had gone from a quarter of a mile to a half a mile, all of a sudden that site's perfect. So
Yeah, and Ryan, I think it's important to note, like, those things are changing all the time. And so I'm just going to do a plug for the Affordable Housing Consortium and our membership, because
yeah,
that's one of the things that we tend to track. And you know, I talk to all of the people who are involved in making those decisions about what policies are changing, and what, you know, what would be helpful, what would be harmful. And so we seek feedback from our members to provide their input on, you know, policy changes. So the tax credit programs, I think every year they do updates. And this last year had been really shifting the focus of the tax credit program to support tenants. And so it has changed a lot. And I know right now the Department of Commerce is actually updating their policy handbook for housing trust fund dollars. And so, like, that's another thing, right? And then our local funders, they're trying to align their funding with equity in transit-oriented development. And so seriously, like, I swear it's almost every year that the stuff is going through changes. And yeah, so being a member of the consortium kind of helps you stay on top of that, and then also provide your voice when you know that something's going to be more harmful than helpful for a project. Because we write letters and we have really great partnerships that are created to kind of help say, like, hey, no, that's not going to work for us. So yeah, and if you have questions about that too, Ryan, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can get you all the resources that you need and connect you with all of the folks who could answer your questions about that as well.
I fully intend Ryan to become a member.
Me too. Sounds like he's interested.
Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Zach is seriously a wealth of knowledge, and this is a really great opportunity for you guys. Gosh, I guess everybody has all of their questions answered.
Okay, I have a question.
Thank you.
And Zach, this would be more of an opinion, right? Like what could the Affordable Housing Consortium or what and who could we be talking to that would attract nonprofit and for-profit housing development that's needed? I mean, I'm sure you have 20, but if you want to share 3 that we could have, even though you're on the board and you're in the group, but I just want this group to see, you know, what the biggest obstacles be. Thank you for what you do, and like the 3 big ones that would attract more businesses or investors to come into our territory.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, we're doing a lot of the right things, in my opinion. I mean, obviously I'm on the board and part of the conversation kind of on an ongoing basis, but I mean, we've put some local money, city money and county money into play. I think that was huge in attracting people, outside developers to come to Pierce County. I think we've put things in place like City of Tacoma permit expedite options. I think that's important. I think honestly, one of the biggest frustrations that I have is that City of Tacoma was working really hard with housing providers, residents, kind of folks to create this rental housing code that was, I think, going to work well. And I think it was unfortunate that got kind of overshadowed by the Tacoma for All thing. But, you know, I think honestly, we're doing a lot of the right stuff. I think we could further, you know, attract outside developers by trying to create some programs that either prioritize affordable housing on certain sites or prioritize, you know, the ability to rezone or kind of get conditional use permits or something like that in the county. I think the city of Tacoma has some programs for affordable housing production, particularly when it involves a nonprofit. I think those programs are kind of in place. I don't know how well they're working, but I think the city's trying. I think the county, from a kind of land use and permitting side, is generally good to work with, but could probably put some programs in place to help emphasize the support for affordable housing. But yeah, honestly, I can't point to a specific thing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
seems kind of hard too, Mark. I'm clinging on to the investor side here because, you know, Pierce County is, I think we're the second, third most populated county in Washington, and we are severely underfunded when it comes to our affordable housing. So development dollars and services. And in comparison to King County, you see these big, you know, tech firms, Amazon and Microsoft, who are just putting tons of money up there, and like they need it as well. But the reality is that a lot of those folks that are getting priced out of Seattle are coming down to Pierce County and putting pressure on us. And we're not seeing the investment that Seattle has to kind of address that. And the other big thing too is, and a lot of folks aren't going to like me saying this, but Seattle has a housing levy, and that provides a ton of money to put projects online, and they're competitive. They get most of the state dollars for their development. They also get like their own share of tax credits, right? And so it's like they're not even competing against the rest of the state. So you just see a lot of investment going there, and we're kind of like the trickle down, and we've done a really great job fighting for what we have. And you know, really proud of the sales tax that passed. Unfortunately, like sales tax is, you know, what we know of as regressive, and but it's like it's one of the only tools that we have had to really address the problem. And with